yesterday's news.
Hello and welcome to Old News, the programme and podcast which looks at news stories of the day through the press of yesterday. The papers in particular, of course. Manx Radio hasn't always been here. What else could we look at this week but the TT and one of my favourite sections of the TT, namely the chairs, the sidecars. Always entertaining, and they always seem to be a poor second somehow compared to the singles. I'm not quite too sure why. But the camaraderie and the bravery and all the rest of it that goes with them, absolutely amazing. And plenty featured over the years, most of which will be old news indeed to sidecar fanatics. But perhaps to others, it might be new news. Let's go back to 1923, the Isle of Man Times. Saturday, June the 16th, the Sidecar TT most thrilling contest ever seen, we're told. Dixon's great triumph. The start Wednesday afternoon. The much-discussed race for sidecars took place today, the most thrilling race ever seen in the world over the famous TT course. The first man being away at 2:45 p.m. on the conclusion of the lightweight race. This race for sidecar machines was limited to 600cc. I think they still are today, aren't they? And was a new innovation this year, and an exceedingly large number of thrills must have been afforded to the crowds round the course by the spectacular performances of both riders and sidecar passengers. It was a race to test the will of the driver, the courage of the passenger, and the quality of the machine. The experiment of initiating a sidecar race for the improvement of that today rather unwieldy machine was a good one, worthy of encouragement, we are told. It is only by experience gained in such a thorough test as a road race that the faults of this article can be remedied and made safe for general public to use. Only one semi-flexi sidecar was used, and that was attached to Freddie Dixon's Douglas machine. Its progress was watched with utmost interest throughout the race. There were some who watched the sidecar's performance with dubious eyes, and there were also some which looked upon it with admiration. Freddie Dixon looked upon it with confidence. The sidecar was invented by Mr. Dixon and S.L. Bailey of Douglas Motors, and recently it has been patented. Certainly Dixon started as a hot favourite in the race, a close runner-up being Graham Walker on his Norton. In practice, the record time was set up by Dixon, who completed a circuit of 42 minutes and some odd seconds. Don't need to worry about those. I would like to add that Freddie Dixon's wonderful tilting sidecar or leading sidecar I have close contact with, as not that many years ago, a garage I owned was used to actually store it during the TT period for a parade lap, and so I managed to have a good look and photographs at close quarters, and a wonderful thing it was indeed. The writing is always wonderful in these early stories from the papers going back to the early 1920s, staying in the same year. We hear in the second circuit the fastest man through the start was Langman with Scott, who was absolutely shifting in no uncertain manner. He was going like the proverbial smoke, and no wonder when it was known that his time was 41 minutes 36 seconds faster than the fastest lightweight record. It was found that both Sunbeam competitors, Reg Brown and Pat Cowley, had retired, not completing one lap. Pa Cowley's retirement was made necessary at Sulby through a gearbox trouble, whilst Reg Brown retired at Crosby 5 miles from the start with engine trouble, the personnel being quite okay. If we look at the Isle of Man Examiner of Friday, June the 15th, 1923, the sidecar race there. The sidecars were started in single file at 2:45. A considerable number of the solar machines were due to arrive. A notable absentee was Clary Wood, the Scott Squirrel champion, who crashed into a steamroller at Craig Willie Sill on the Wednesday morning practice, luckily without worse injury than a dislocated shoulder. What was the steamroller doing there, we wonder? His place was taken by S.E. Longman, an approved reserve. A rousing cheer was recorded to the veteran Pa Cowley, and much commiseration was expressed when a few minutes later it was learnt that he'd been compelled to retire at Sulby with gearbox trouble. Oh dear. Before 3:30, the aforementioned Freddie Dixon, with the ingenious machine of his own invention, had completed the first round in a time of 42 minutes 23 seconds, slightly better than anything he'd done in the practices, where he'd been far and away the fastest man. It was an ingenious bike, it has to be said. And then we have more wonderful description of the racing. Dixon finished at 5 minutes to 5, we are told, just a little slower than the two previous rounds. Victory was obviously his, and he was the recipient of the heartiest congratulations. Poor Langman had crashed at Braddon Bridge, and information as to the injuries sustained by himself and his passenger were very vague. It transpired later they'd been taken to hospital and that the injuries had not consisted of more than comparatively minor cuts. The contest between Walker and Tucker for second place was developing very interestingly, but finally Walker held his own and increased his margin by a few seconds. Also an interesting line on this one. I think they should bring this back. I think it would be a wonderful thing. Mr. T.C. Moore, proprietor of the Timwell Mills, St. John's, where are manufactured those Manx tweed cloths and blankets and rugs which are already gaining so wide a reputation, has offered to present a suit length to the winner of each race, and not merely so, but to dispatch it to the wearer's own tailor. Well, of course, all sidecar races have their own tailors, and to settle the tailor's bill. A piece of advertising undoubtedly, says the paper, quite correctly, but one hopes the qualities of the suit will attract all the desired attention from the wearer's friends. And why wouldn't it? Good Manx cloth. The abandonment of the sidecar race. Now, this might have been forgotten by a few people, of course. Who was to blame? Whole fault lies with the manufacturers, says Professor Lowe, and this is from the Isle of Man Examiner of Friday, May the 26th, 1933. The sidecars being abandoned. Considerable controversy has been aroused in motoring circles with regard to the last-minute decision of the Autocycle Union to abandon the sidecar TT on account of the paucity of entries. In this week's issue of Motorcycling, a lot of correspondence from various quarters is included. We've taken the liberty of extracting a few of the most pointed remarks, and here are a few of them. It is little short of scandalous, says a Mr. C. Bennett, that the 10 sportsmen who have paid their entry fees, some at double fees in the hope the race would be saved, should be informed at the last minute the event was off. Scarlet Panel says one cannot attach any blame to the ACU. If this race can be included in 1934, perhaps some of those readers who have asked for this class for the past 12 months will put down a little deposit, as it rather looks as though some of them only wanted to see the race and not compete. And H. Julian says, my sympathies are all with those 10 sportsmen who'd sent in their fees. I think they deserve a little more consideration than they appear to have received. Surely this race could have been curtailed to one lap and run off one evening during the week. Well, who'd have thought? Controversy in 1933. We skip forward to the Isle of Man Examiner of Friday, November the 30th, 1951, where I told in a headline, no sidecar TT in 1952. Mr. Dixon, not Freddie Dixon this time, but Norman Dixon, outlines the snags. Mr. Norman Dixon, chairman of the ACU's TT subcommittee, told the ACU General Council meeting that there were insurmountable difficulties. Mr. Dixon said neither he nor the subcommittee opposed the idea, but he listed the following objections to the new race. An estimated additional cost of some £2,000. The Manx authorities refused to allow racing on more than 3 days in TT week. Need for separate practice periods for solos and sidecars. The opposition of the Chief Constable to having races on the mountain circuit and the car course suggested for the sidecars on the same day. Not a single manufacturer welcomed the proposed race. The ACU was loath to abandon the clubman's TT. The British Sidecar Association, we are told, put the case for substituting a sidecar race for the clubman TT, which it was suggested could be run in England on an airfield. Spokesman for the sidecar race urged that the clubman races had no place in a week devoted to classic events. On the other hand, supporters for the clubman's TT urged that it had as much importance to the sport and industry as the TT itself. And one speaker declared that in view of the contribution which the ACU made to Isle of Man prosperity, the union was entitled to insist on a 4th day's racing. The TT subcommittee announced that the TT programme in 1952 will follow the lines of that in 1951, with International Junior and Clubman's Junior on June the 9th, lightweight and ultra-lightweight in the morning of June the 11th, with the Senior Clubman's race in the afternoon and the Senior TT on June the 13th. In 1954, in the Ramsey Courier of Friday, June the 18th, sidecar TT is revived, is the headline. after 29 years, and a German blonde is a passenger on the fifth machine. The Sidecar TT revival on Wednesday over the Clips course, we note, the Clips course, not the mountain course, certainly provided the crowds with plenty of excitement. Happily, the event passed off without serious mishap, and it was a triumph for the fine, consistent driving of the well-known sidecar exponent Eric Oliver of Birmingham against continental competition. The International Sidecar TT race, after a lapse of 29 years, promised to be one of the most spectacular events of the series. The rain held off, that's a miracle, and the crowds gathered around the Clips course, which had been used earlier by the ultra-lightweight bikes in their race. The thrills gained from watching the sidecar passengers perform on the bends and corners, in some instances dodging away from walls and hedges, certainly attracted the crowds. The centre of attention was Ingeborg Stoller-Lafoger, 24 years old, blonde, from Aachen, Germany, who created TT history by being the first woman competitor in the TT race. A passenger in the sidecars, would you believe? Ingeborg Stoller-Lafoger, or Laforge it might be. She hit the headlines again in the Ramsey Courier of Friday, July the 2nd of 1954. Blonde sidecar girl hits out, screams the headline. Face-slapping incident in Ulster TT. Blonde Inga Stoller-Lafoger, who took part in the sidecar TT around the Clips course, was in a sensational incident after the Ulster Grand Prix sidecar race at Belfast when she slapped the face of a German rider, Walter Schneider, who finished before her. When she was pulled away, she complained that Schneider had been in their way all the time and would not let them past. It was deliberate balking, she's reported to have said. Her partner, French champion Jacques Drian, who was driving, agreed. He added there was too much of that sort of thing in sidecar racing, and he was fed up with it. Schneider finished fifth, 53 seconds ahead of Drian. We turn to the Times of Saturday, June the 12th, 1954. Sidecar thrills. A passenger thrown from the machine. Cyril Smith the fastest. For the first time in 29 years, as we heard, sidecar combinations roared around a course in the Isle of Man this evening to give thousands of spectators a new kind of thrill. It was the first tryout of the 11-mile-long Clips circuit by both sidecars and the 125cc ultra-lightweight motorcycles. It promised plenty of thrills once the riders were used to it. The fastest combination was former world champion Cyril Smith, with S. Dibben as passenger on his Norton, who lapped in 9 minutes 40 seconds a speed of 67.14 miles per hour. For the Germans, it was the first time they'd seen the course, and F. Krohn, a passenger with W. Knoll, was thrown out of the sidecar when their BMW took the bend at 5.5 corner. Krohn was unhurt and carried on to compete and complete the whole 5 laps. The fastest at 69.42 miles per hour. Glad to hear there are no injuries. Not all people approved of the return of the sidecars, it seemed. The Isle of Man Times, Saturday, April the 24th, 1954. The trade deplores sidecar TT decision. Members of the Motorcycle Joint Advisory Committee passed a resolution recently deploring the ACU's decision to run a sidecar TT. The resolution was: the Motorcycle Joint Advisory Committee regrets that the ACU should have gone forward with its plan for a sidecar TT race, contrary to the expressed wishes of motorcycle manufacturers. The committee considers that the holding of such an event is detrimental to the interests of the motorcycle industry. Quite why doesn't seem to be explained. Representatives of the motorcycle manufacturers and representatives of the Motor Agents Association make up the committee. Also in 1954, a good year for sidecars it seemed, or certainly a momentous year, a Laxey man was in the 1924 sidecar TT. I think we were just as fast on the corners, he says. Thoughtfully watching the sidecars speeding round the 5.5-mile corner on Wednesday was 58-year-old Norman Tinkler of the Fairy Cottage filling station in Laxey, says an article in the Isle of Man Times of Saturday, June the 19th, 1954. As outfit after outfit flashed by and the roar of racing exhaust filled his ears, Norman Tinkler's thoughts flew back to June 1924, when he was passenger in a sidecar driven by his brother, Armand. Armand, what a great name. they took their 350cc Matador into third place in the Sidecar TT, an average speed of just over 44 miles per hour, after a first lap spill at the Ramsey hairpin where Norman fell out of the chair. To put it in his own words, a wheel lifted, we shot across the road, mounted the bank and I fell out. It knocked out a stud, and after that we had to take on a gallon of oil at the end of each lap. A gallon of oil. Shockhead Mr. Tinkler, a member of the Laxey Village Commissioners, does not think the modern combinations are any faster on the corners than were the outfits of 30 years ago. The modern machines are much faster and have more powerful engines, he says, but I think we were just as fast on the corners. The sidecars we used were about 6 inches narrower, he added. His verdict of Wednesday's spectacle: it was a fine race, but I still think we were as fast around the corners, for all the gymnastics, he grinned. Not that he's bitter. The Alaman Examiner of Friday, July the 5th, 1957, says the Sidecar TT riders plea, let us race on the mountain course. Bill Boddas, was that Mick Boddas's father? One of the leading British sidecar racing drivers, in a letter to motorcycling makers, and appealed to the ACU to forget the Clips course for next year and let everyone have a proper race. He adds, this is the only thing that will ensure our entry for the Sidecar TT for next year. Then there is a note. The Sidecar TT this year, that's 1957, was won at the record average of 71.89 miles per hour over 10 laps of the 10.79 mile Clips course, with a record lap at 72.55 miles per hour. Eric Oliver, former world champion, now retired, averaged 73.62 miles per hour for one lap of the 37 3/4 mile mountain course when he did a lap of honour after the Golden Jubilee Senior TT. The Sidecar TT, we are told, was originally run on the mountain course in 1923, over 3 laps, 1924 and 1925, 4 laps each year. And finally, from the Alaman Times of Friday, May the 9th, 1958, Beauty Queen as passenger, Eric Oliver in Sidecar TT, Will Pilot Standard Racing Norton. Eric Oliver, 4 times World Sidecar Champion, is to enter for this year's Sidecar TT. 3 years, he couldn't stay away, could he, after officially retiring from the racing game. But he returns to sponsor a unique idea of racing a standard Norton-dominated twin with a production model Watsonian sidecar. And his passenger will be a woman, Mrs. Patsy Wise of Louth in Lincolnshire. I think it's Louth rather than Louth. A former beauty queen at Butlands Camp Skegness, she has owned and ridden a Velocette for a number of years. Though familiar with motorcycles and racing, she's never ridden in a sidecar. Along with Mr. Ron Watson of Watsonian Sidecars and Mr. Wise, Eric and his passenger have been on the island this week trying the standard combination on parts of the Clips course. Though up against high-powered BMWs and Nortons, Eric said his idea was not to challenge the fast men. My idea is to get around as fast as I can and finish within replica time. Well, I hope he did. Just a smidgen of the news about sidecars in the TT over the years. And who still remembers the fact that they disappeared for almost 3 decades before returning? And I'm very glad they did. I hope there's safe racing for all sidecar competitors this year, whichever way you look at it, of course. For most people, and particularly sidecar fans, it's all old news. Until next time, cheerio. You're gonna be yesterday's news.